The basic finding of our report was our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal.
The Kerner Report, commissioned by the U.S. government on the heels of the Civil Rights Movement, examined racial inequality in America more than 50 years ago.
For generations, the United States government had communicated through laws and policies and practices, as well as narratives, that black people were inferior. And then, virtually on a dime, the U.S. government began to say that they were wrong.
But the Kerner Report never led to sweeping policy changes, and now, after a year of reckoning with many of the same inequalities exposed, can America learn from the failures of the past?
Pillage, looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights. They are criminal conduct.
In the summer of 1967, violence was erupting in cities across the U.S., often in response to incidents of police brutality. Facing political pressure, President Lyndon Johnson pulls together the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, made up of lawmakers and local leaders, commonly known as the Kerner Commission. It's named for the chairman of the group, former Illinois Governor Otto Kerner. Johnson sets a clear agenda.
We need to know the answer to three basic questions about these riots. What happened? Why did it happen? What can be done to prevent it from happening again and again?
Part of what Johnson is hoping is that Kerner will not produce any kind of radical recommendations and will basically praise Johnson for everything he's done and offer some modest solutions to what has to happen next.
The only member still alive today is former Senator Fred Harris of Oklahoma.
We spent, for example, a day in Milwaukee in a black barbershop. The question I was asking was, do you find more discrimination here in Milwaukee or less as compared to where you came from in the South? The reason that puzzled them was, in Milwaukee, they didn't even see any white people. There was more segregation in this northern city than there was where they'd come from, in Birmingham or Jackson or wherever. That was a really important realization for us.
In March 1968, the Kerner Report was released, shedding light on the plight of black Americans in 23 cities when it came to education, employment, welfare, and housing conditions. The report also singled out one major common denominator.
We said these conditions were a result of white racism. White racism created these black ghettos, as we said it then, and it's white racism which sustains them. We're not talking about whether one white person hates black people. We're talking about a system where you live in an all-white neighborhood. You go into a building, an office, where all you see is white people, and you don't think anything's strange about that. That's what we're talking about. And we thought that was important for young black people particularly. You're not crazy. There is systemic racism in this country. And so we recommended great new programs in regard to jobs and housing and health and education.
It puts these issues on the table, especially policing, in a way that no other government report had.
But in 1968, politics was moving in a different direction.
Johnson doesn't see a window to do this, and it doesn't mean he was right not to do anything, but in his mind, politically, he's just trying to save what he's already done. He's about to announce to the country he's leaving.
And I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
And so the commission doesn't produce any tangible results at the time. Kind of everything moved exactly in the opposite direction of what Kerner and the commissioners were asking the government to do.
That same year, Richard Nixon is elected president, running on a message of law and order.
So I pledge to you, we shall have order in the United States.
A decade later, Ronald Reagan,
while drug and alcohol abuse cuts across all generations,
pushes for an unprecedented expansion of the war on drugs. And in 1994, President Bill Clinton signs a bill into law increasing federal funding to fight crime.
Never again should Washington put politics and party above law and order.
The groundbreaking findings of the Kerner Report on racial disparities faded away into history.
My father was a small farmer in southwestern Oklahoma. The way he heard the Kerner Report was something like this: Mr. Harris, out of the goodness of your heart, you ought to pay more taxes in order to help poor black people who are rioting in Detroit. And my father's response to me was something like, to hell with that, I'm already paying too much tax and getting very little out of it. The thing I really believe in, everybody does better when everybody does better. That did not get out right away.
The Kerner Commission came at a time when the very brief window that had been forced open by the courageous sacrifice of civil rights movement activists was beginning to close in terms of the popular white tolerance for progress on racial justice and civil rights. The biggest impediment to our progress is a zero-sum worldview, and that's the idea that progress for people of color has to come at white folks' expense. These divisions are our greatest Achilles heel in the United States.
In order to address those divisions, 2 Democratic lawmakers have proposed another commission on racial inequality. This one, the U.S. Commission on Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. But what could be different this time around is that it's focused on grassroots efforts at the local level within the community.
Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation isn't a program. It's a frame to look at the problems that exist in our world. And so the healing process is really about bridging between groups that don't see one another and one another's humanity.
In over a dozen communities around the U.S., local leaders are using this framework to find solutions. And in Flint, Michigan, organizer Isaiah Oliver says it's changed the way his community approaches issues around race.
Instead of me moving to judge you when you say, let's defund the police, if I move to wonder because I care enough about you as a person, the person that I've broken bread with, the person that I've shed a tear with, the person that I understand that lifelong story that you've been holding on to, you finally shared it with me. If I can go back there as opposed to going back home and doubling down on whatever lived experience I have or whatever perspective I brought, that's a different frame and a different place to start from.
A commission in Washington that is going to be filtered through the partisan talking points and divide is not going to heal the nation's divides. That's why we need something that is seated at the grassroots.
We don't need any more studies. We know what needs to be done, and we know what the facts are. It doesn't do any good to yell at people about do the right thing. We have to get people to see their own self-interest in this.
Let's not start with the problem. Again, you can't start in the middle. You gotta start at the beginning. We're not fixed. We are still broken, and we still have a need to heal.